The noted British historian Arnold Toynbee has a sweeping theory of human development called the cycle of challenge and response. According to this theory, every civilization faces a constant succession of challenges and confrontations, and its viability and soundness can be measured by the vigor and nature of the response. It may meet the challenge head-on, emerging stronger and healthier for the encounter. It may react defensively, desperately, leaving the struggle exhausted. Or it may, at the first sign of threat, simply lie down and die. As it is with civilizations, so it may be with movements. For that matter, so it may be with individuals. Our vitality, our spirit, and our very capacity for survival can likely be measured not only by the vigor of our response to challenge and confrontation, but also by the pattern and the nature of that response. When the National Federation of the Blind came into being in 1940, there were certainly both challenge and confrontation. But neither the professionals in the field nor the public at large understood the full implications of the challenge or anticipated the ultimate fury of the coming confrontation. 1940 was another time and a different climate. Barely a scattering had the faith to believe and the courage to hope. They were the founders of the National Federation of the Blind. Those original Federationists were not the powerful force of concerted action which we know today, not the united voice of the nation's blind. All of that was still a generation ahead, in the promise of the future and the fullness of the years. It is only when we look back that we realize how far we have come. In 1940, the blind were universally regarded as inferiors, and there was a general feeling that it was inappropriate for them to organize and take a hand in their own affairs. It was an atmosphere which broke the spirit and quenched the hope and killed the dream. But the resistance to the notion that the blind should organize, the challenges and the confrontations, did not for the most part come from hatred or viciousness or a wish to hurt. It came instead from pity, misunderstanding, misplaced kindness, or at worst, apathy and a desire to maintain the status quo. That was 1940. This is 1979. What has happened to us in the intervening years? What challenges and confrontations do we face today? How do these challenges and confrontations differ from those of 1940? In short, as a movement and a people, where are we and where are we going? In broad outline, the story of the past 4 decades is easy to read and quickly told. At first, the Federation was small and largely ignored. It had few members and little influence. The governmental and private agencies tried to treat it as if it were not unique at all, but simply another provider of services, one among many, a miniature duplicate of what already was. In other words, a newcomer, but one of themselves. The public, to the extent that the public knew about the Federation at all, took its lead from the professionals. But the blind knew otherwise. They knew of the need which only the Federation could fill. They knew it in the yearning for freedom, in the lack of opportunity, in the rejection by society, and in the exclusion from the rights and privileges of full participation and equal status. They knew that the Federation was theirs, for whatever successes it might achieve or whatever failures it might make, it was theirs. Its primary purpose was not to provide services, but to monitor and hold to account those who did provide services. And there were other purposes: to change social attitudes, fight discrimination, eliminate prejudice, create self-awareness, instill hope, touch the conscience, and above all, establish a means by which the blind could discuss common problems, reach decisions, and make their voices heard. The Federation was unique. It was and is the collective voice of the nation's blind, the blind thinking for themselves, speaking for themselves, and acting for themselves. Our battle for freedom and recognition parallels to a striking degree that experienced by the blacks. For we are, in every modern sense of that term, a minority. We have our ghettos, our unemployment, our underemployment, and our Uncle Toms. We have our establishment, composed of society as a whole, and particularly of many of the professionals in the governmental and the private agencies. That establishment condescendingly loves us if we stay in our places, and bitterly resents us if we strive for equality. Above all, through our own organization, the National Federation of the Blind, we have discovered our collective conscience and found our true identity. We have learned that it is not our blindness which has put us down and kept us out, but what we and others have thought about our blindness. Yet they tell us that there is no discrimination and that we are not a minority. We want no strife or confrontation, but we will do what we have to do. We are simply no longer willing to be second-class citizens. We have said it before, and we will say it again. We know who we are, and we will never go back. No group ever goes from second-class status to first-class citizenship without passing through a period of hostility. Several years ago, I made the statement that we hadn't even come far enough up the stairway of independence for anybody to hate us. I believe I can safely say that that problem has now been solved. In my way of thinking, we have enemies enough to satisfy even the most militant among us. We have actually progressed to the point of creating a backlash. However, we must see the situation in perspective. The hostility and backlash which we are experiencing are not due to mistakes on our part, or to radical behavior, or to over-aggressiveness, or to any of the other trumped-up charges which have been made against us. Just as with the black civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, the hostile reactions and backlash are an inevitable step on the stairs which lead from the depths of rejection and custody to the upper level of freedom and first-class status. The bottom steps of that stairway are often paved with condescension and pity. The middle steps are sometimes paved with goodwill and the beginnings of acceptance, but the top steps are always paved with resentment and fear. We have come a long way up. We're approaching the top of the stairs, and we are experiencing our full measure of fear and resentment. The fear and resentment come from those who have a vested interest in keeping us down. The sheltered shops with their sub-minimum wages, which were the subject of the recent Wall Street Journal articles and 60 Minutes. The New York agencies, which we have helped expose through damning audits. The National Accreditation Council for Agencies Serving the Blind and Visually Handicapped, NAC, which we oppose for its phony standards, its meaningless accreditation, its lust to manage our lives, and its desperate effort to gain public support and respectability. The Cleveland Society for the Blind, which we have taken to court because of its wrongful seizure of the earnings of blind food service operators and its attempts to control the smallest details of their daily existence. The American Foundation for the Blind, which we call to task for its drippy publicity and its pseudo-professionalism. The insurance companies, which, by court action and administrative regulation, we seek to prevent from charging us extra rates and denying us coverage. The airlines, against whom we demonstrate for trying to tell us where we can sit, that we cannot keep our canes during flight, that we must travel with an attendant, and sometimes that we cannot even board the plane at all. And all of those other public officials and private individuals who have an economic interest in keeping us from achieving independence, or who boost their egos and show their insecurity by the need to feel superior, to custodialize, to condescend, and treat us as wards. Whether we finish the climb up the stairway to freedom and social acceptance, leaving behind the hostility and backlash, will be determined not by the action of others, but by our own behavior. This is our challenge and our confrontation. It is also the strongest possible proof of how far we have come. For the first time in history, the choice is ours. As other minorities have discovered, the final steps are the hardest. There are several reasons why this is so. For one thing, the degradations and deprivations at the bottom of the stairs are, once they are pointed out and clearly delineated, so obvious and unjust that they are easily understood, and large groups of the general public can be touched in their conscience and enlisted to help, still keeping intact their sense of superior worth and special status. The minority, after all, is a long way down and poses no apparent threat, even by climbing a few steps up. At the top of the stairs, things are different. The discrimination is more complex and subtle, the prejudice less obvious, the threat to vested interest more real, and the violations of tradition more imminent. There is also the fact that the members of the minority group are part of the larger society. They tend to see themselves as others see them. They tend to accept the false views of their limitations, and thus do much to make those limitations a reality. I can offer a personal example. On February 11, 1979, an article written by R.H. Gardner appeared in the Baltimore Sun. It was headlined, "Ice Castles, a Little Hard to Swallow," and this is what it said. Several years ago, I was at a party when a friend, for reasons I cannot recall, bet me I could not stand on one foot 15 seconds with my eyes closed. I had been quite an athlete in my youth, 10 years old, during which period I could stand on practically any part of my anatomy, head, hands, ears, or toes, for an indefinite length of time. I accepted the bet. To my astonishment, at the count of 5, I began to waver. At 7, the waver turned to a stagger, and at 10, I was lost. It was a great shock for a former athlete, even a 10-year-old one, and I have never forgotten it. For something happens to your balance when you close your eyes, and how much worse it must be if you're blind. Being blind, a scientist friend once pointed out to me, cannot be compared to closing your eyes. When you close your eyes, you still see. You see the undersides of the lids with the light behind them. But what you see when you're blind is what you see out of the back of your head. There's neither light nor sight of any kind. I was reminded of all this while watching Ice Castles, a film about a blind figure skater. I'm told there is a blind figure skater upon whose career the film is loosely based, but it's hard to believe in view of my experience trying to stand on one leg. When I read that article, as you might imagine, I pooh-poohed it and laughed it to scorn. When I read that article, as you might imagine, I pooh-poohed it and laughed it to scorn. So did one of my sighted associates. Then, just to show how silly it was, she closed her eyes and stood on one foot. But the laughter stopped, for she wobbled and fell. Then she opened her eyes and tried it again. There was no problem. She kept her balance without difficulty. "Nonsense," I said. "Let me show you." Whereupon I stood on one foot and immediately lost my balance. That was 3 months ago. Was I shaken? I certainly was. Then I began doing some thinking. We know that the tests which are made by blindfolding sighted people to determine what the blind can do are totally invalid. I have been among the most vocal in pointing that out. I knew, or at least I thought I knew, that balance is a matter of the inner ear, not the eye. Why then did my associate fall when her eyes were closed, but keep her balance when they were open? Perhaps the fact that she was accustomed to seeing things around her as part of her daily life made the difference. Or perhaps, even though she is well versed in our philosophy, the matter went deeper. Perhaps, reacting to social conditioning, she subconsciously expected to fall and was tense. I suggested that she practice a few times with her eyes closed, and what do you know? It worked. And 4 or 5 times she could stand on one foot as easily with her eyes closed as open. But what about me? I've never had any problem with balance. So I tried it again, that I could do it with perfect ease. If anybody doubts it, I'll be glad to demonstrate after the banquet. Okay, but then why did I fall the first time? I reluctantly conclude, despite all of my philosophy and knowledge to the contrary, despite all of my experience with this very sort of situation, dressed out in other forms, I fell into the trap of social conditioning. I hope I won't do it again, but I can't be sure. There's probably not a blind person alive in the world today, or for that matter a black person, who's not at one time or another sold himself or herself short and accepted the public misconceptions, usually without ever knowing it. Prejudice is subtle, and tradition runs deep. That's how it is at the top of the stairs. Which brings me back to Mr. Gardner and his newspaper article. He was not trying to hurt us, but just make a living. Nevertheless, based on his single false experience as a simulated blind man, he now makes sweeping generalizations about our lacks and our losses. Do you think he would believe we are capable of equality, that we can travel alone, get off an airplane in time of emergency, or compete with others for a regular job, that we deserve insurance at the same rate as the sighted, that we're capable of full and normal lives? Of course not. And his opinions count. He is a member of the press, a molder of thought. And how do you think he will react if one of us brings all of this to his attention? Probably with defensiveness and resentment, probably as part of the backlash. Perhaps he will even help stimulate unfavorable publicity against us, not realizing or admitting why he is doing it, or even, for that matter, that he is doing it. But we have no choice. The alternative is to slide back toward the bottom of the stairs. We will say it as gently and as courteously as we can, but we will say it. We want no strife or confrontation, but we are simply no longer willing to be second-class citizens. We will do what we have to do. We intend to take the final steps on the stairs, for we know who we are and we will never go back. You will remember that Ralph Sanders, in his Banquet speech last year, quoted as follows from a gimmicky ad by a company employing blind persons to smell its perfumes. Why, the ad asks, do people close their eyes when they kiss? Because by cutting off one sense, they heighten the other four. They are completely immersed in the taste, smell, sound, and touch of the kiss. Blind people have the most highly attuned sense of smell possessed by man. Well, I thought about that a lot. What an ad. Such beliefs, as you know, are widely held. But even a moment's reflection will demonstrate their absolute insanity. If a kiss is really made better by closing the eyes, think what a charge you could get if you put corks in your nose and plugs in your ears. If that's the way it is, you might try it. The taste would go all the way to your toes, and the touch would drive you right up the wall. I wouldn't Now, you know, I would not expect the perfume company to appreciate our objection to its ad. But that won't keep us from objecting. That's how it is at the top of the stairs. Sometimes the public misconceptions about blindness are far less innocent, if indeed what I've been talking about is innocent, and I think it hurts us much. But sometimes these public misconceptions about blindness are used as a shield to avoid responsibility or to hide from punishment. Consider, for instance, an article which appeared in the March 8, 1979 Minneapolis Star. It reads, Jerome M. Bach, Minneapolis psychiatrist and a founder of the Bach Institute, a psychotherapy center, has been placed on probation by the Minnesota Board of Medical Examiners for engaging in sexual activities with 4 of his female patients. The board's ruling reversed the finding of a state hearing examiner, Howard L. Cable, Jr. Cable recommended no action be taken against the doctor. Bach, who suffers from tunnel vision from a degenerative condition of the retina, is legally blind. Because of this, Cable said, Bach depends on physical contact as in a... Well, there are lots of phony people in the world, you know. Anyway, continuing with this article, Bach depends on physical contact as an additional means of communication and of obtaining information about his patients. Well, you wait till you hear this next paragraph. Now, this still quotes from the Minneapolis Star. Bach had become widely known among patients and other therapists for an unusual ability to diagnose emotional problems and for his use of physical contact in therapy. According to Cable's findings, Bach's use of physical therapeutic intervention is... I never heard it called that, but... Anyway, let me finish it with you. According to Cable's findings, Bach's use of physical therapeutic intervention is widely known, accepted by literally hundreds of his colleagues, and even coveted by some who are unable to utilize them as effectively. Now, you know, you don't know whether to laugh or to cry at an article like that. That is what the article says, and the mind is boggled at the madness. Did Mr. Cable really mean it? Dr. Bach had never identified with the blind before, and so far as anybody knows, he's never done so since. But when the heat was on, he tried to hide behind the stereotypes. For once, we didn't have to speak out alone. The medical profession, the women's movement, and others joined with us. We did what we could to make something positive out of the situation, attempting to educate the public and show unaligned blind persons why they should join us. Constant vigil, battle, hostility, and backlash, but also growing efforts to inform the public, achieve concerted action, and heighten self-awareness. That's how it is at the top of the stairs. Blind vendors and food service operators constitute one of the largest groups of the employed blind. They work for their money and earn what they get, but some of them fail to recognize their common bond with the rest of us, their need for the organized blind movement. Those who have such attitudes should read a novel about the CIA published in 1978. It is called Ballet, and it is written by Tom Murphy. Although it speaks directly to blind vendors, it speaks just as falsely and just as insultingly to all of the rest of us. The following passage occurs on page 51 and introduces chapter 3. And I quote, "Dave Laughlin had the rough bulk of a longshoreman and the ambling shuffle of a geriatric bear. Dave was 30 pounds heavier and more than 30 years older than he'd been in the Army OSS days, the last happy time he could remember. And now, as Dave made his way down the long, green, asphalt-tiled corridor that always reminded him of a hospital, of death, he felt every minute of those years and every extra ounce weighing on him like an unserved sentence. And he felt the effects of last night's boozing, which didn't help either. He passed the blind lunch counter and shuddered, even though he'd known it would be there, creepy as ever, even if it was the old man's idea, even if it did make some kind of perverted sense. Where else in the world would you have blind men and women cheerfully handing out wrapped sandwiches and cartons of coffee so bad it could only have been made by the blind? Where else but in the ever-vigilant atmosphere of CIA headquarters out in dear old Langley, Virginia? Now look, that book is circulating by the tens of thousands throughout this country right now. It approaches genius in its ability to malign and misstate. It manages to lump almost all of the stereotypes, every one of them, into a couple of sentences. The blind are cheerful. We're creepy. It's perverted to have us about. We can't make sandwiches, but must get them pre-wrapped. We can't even make a decent cup of coffee. Here is no kindness or even condescending pity, only meanness and contemptuous dismissal. Each one of us, vendor and non-vendor alike, should think carefully about this book and the others like it which blight our opportunities and poison the public mind. We have no choice. The alternative is to slide back toward the bottom of the stairs. We will say it as gently and as courteously as we can, but I can tell you this, we will say it. We intend to take the final steps on the stairs, and we'll take it together. We do know who we are, and we're not going back. The meanness of the Murphy novel is by no means universal, but it's certainly a sign of the times, an evidence of backlash, and a proof that we're close to the top of the stairs. Southwest Airlines, which proudly proclaims that it spreads love around Texas, recently initiated a policy of refusing to transport the blind or the mentally retarded unless they are accompanied by an attendant. And a Southwest official a few months ago wrote the following bit of disgusting gibberish to our Texas President Glenn Crosby, and this is what he said: "In regard to your question about canes being taken away from passengers, this is a security measure. Obviously, we have no way of knowing what a passenger will do with such an object. Therefore, as a precaution, all such articles are taken away during flight. Not much love in that, is there? Nor are the Southwest officials likely to feel any kindness toward the Federation, especially since from time to time we picket their counters and expose their behavior to the public. Well, nobody wants to picket and nobody wants the hostility, but then what choice have we got? Backlash, yes, but also, hopefully, breakthroughs to reason and public understanding. That's how it is at the top of the stairs, and regardless of the cost, we intend to take those final steps. In Iowa, where the progress has probably been greatest and the backlash strongest, not only have we suffered sustained, vicious, unfounded, and unscrupulous attacks from the Des Moines newspaper, but we are also engaged in a battle in the courts. As the blind of the nation know, Herbert Anderson, Iowa's enlightened insurance commissioner, ruled a couple of years ago that insurance companies cannot discriminate against the blind in rates or coverage. As could have been predicted, the insurance companies, even those which had always claimed that they were, as they put it, most sympathetic to the blind, suddenly turned hostile. When one of them, Federal Kemper, was fined $1,000 and ordered to mend its ways, it decided all of a sudden that the blind were ungrateful and that we were an unreasonable lot, and it took the matter to court. On March 23rd, 1979, Judge Theodore Miller, who will not be remembered as one of the more enlightened spirits of the age, stated as follows in his findings of facts. 9. This is a quote from his facts now. The court takes judicial notice of the fact that the blind have only 4 of the 5 senses, consisting of sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. Common knowledge provides that one with less than all of the common senses operates at a disadvantage and is more susceptible to be unable to function as an able-bodied person than one with all of his senses. Federal statutes recognize by implication the disabilities which blind people suffer and have provided tax exemptions for them. End of quote. When you sort out all of the garbled language, he's not a very good writer, the judge is clearly saying that no proof is necessary, that it's a fact that the blind can't cut it on terms of equality with others. It's a matter of common knowledge. In number 17 of his conclusions, Judge Miller takes the astounding position that if blind persons are denied insurance, no discrimination has occurred since we have all been denied to the same degree and therefore have received equal treatment. Try that. Not much love in that, is there? And not much intelligence either. But that's how it is when you deal with vested interest, threats to tradition, and backlash. Commissioner Anderson and we are appealing this case to the Iowa Supreme Court. Whatever the cost or the backlash, we intend to take those final steps. That's how it is at the top of the stairs, and we're coming close. Today I have said very little about the professionals in the field of work with the blind. But the picture would not be complete without their inclusion. Increasing numbers of them are working with us and taking joy in our progress. But there are others. NAC, the American Foundation for the Blind, and their allies have tremendous wealth and broad contacts. They could, if they chose, do much to hasten the day of the liberation of the blind. But they seem to feel that they have a vested interest in our continued dependence and subjugation. Perhaps Louis Reeves, blind himself and the president of the National Accreditation Council for agencies serving the blind and visually handicapped, Louis Reeves, head of programs for the blind in Arkansas. Perhaps he has summed up the philosophy of inferiority and defeatism as well as it has ever been put. It is certainly the opposite of everything we believe and have experienced. Last year at the NAC meeting, he said that there are only two ways of making the blind and the sighted equal. Either the blind can regain their sight, he said, or the sighted can have their eyes plucked out. That's what he said, and he pretends to be a professional in the field. With such professionals, is it any wonder that the public is not yet informed? But with or without the professionals, we will take those final steps. We'll reach the top of the stairs. As president of the National Federation of the Blind, I receive, as you know, many letters. Some are encouraging, others heartrending. But I think I have never received a letter more expressive and more revealing than the one I'm about to share with you. I have shared it already with some of you who have attended seminars, and I would like to share it with all of you. It was written to me by Edgar Sammons, who lives in Mountain City, Tennessee, and it speaks with the language and the clarity of Elizabethan prose. I've never met Edgar Sammons, but I've thought long about his letter, and I've come to feel a deep affection and a high respect for him. He's not a complainer, not a whiner, but he's known custody, terrible loneliness, blighted hope, and real deprivation. Yet he has made a life for himself. His letter is as significant for what it doesn't say as for what it does. I have his permission to use it, otherwise I wouldn't do it. Here's what he says. I was born on October 30, 1913. They said I lost my sight at 3 weeks old. I grew just like the rest of them. I think a blind person should be brought up just like a sighted person, but most of them are not. Most of them would learn a lot more if they would let them. We just had an old boxed house and a little land, not enough to make a living on. My father always rented corn ground for half of it. My mother put up a lot of stuff, and we always had enough to eat. My father worked on the first highway that come through here. They blacktopped it in 1924. I interrupt the letter to point out that he's now 11 years old, and this is the first thing in his life that's happened to him that he feels noteworthy. But let me continue. My father rented a little farm, and we moved to it. It was not very far from here. We lived there a year, and we moved back. My mother always wanted to send me to school, but my father never would give up for it. My grandmother and my mother and my little baby sister all died in 1924. There were 5 of us children left. Some people wanted to put us in a home. We had a hard time, but we made out. If the family could have had their way, I don't guess I would have been allowed to get off the place without some of them with me. They couldn't watch me all the time. My grandmother Salmons was still living, and they would send me down there when they would go to work in the corn. That suited me just fine. My grandmother would be doing her housework, and I would go down the road about a half a mile to my aunt's and stay a while. Sometime some of them would find it out and tell on me, but I didn't care what they done about it. I would run off every chance I got. There was just a mud road around here then, but I got along. They would take me places with them at night. They went a lot of places at that I would have liked to have went, but they left me at my grandmother's. I think the blind should be allowed to get out and learn to get around, just like the sighted when they're growing up. A lot of us don't have that chance. My brother and my father went to work in a cotton mill at Johnson City, and we moved down there in 1927. He was born in 1913, so he's now 14 years old. The mill closed down in 1928, and we moved back. Now he's 15. In 1933, he's now 20. All of the children got off over at Asheville, North Carolina, and got jobs. You notice he didn't get a job. My father married again in 1933. I stayed at home most of the time. After that, my job in the summertime was pasturing the cows in the road. I had bells on them so I could tell where they was at. I sat on the banks with the cows, wondering how I could get a little money to get me some tobacco. I was a young man then. The welfare started here in 1937. He's now 24. I got a little. A lot of the blind didn't get any. There wasn't very much work for the blind then. I would go to Asheville and stay a while, and come back here and stay a while, and then go back there and stay a while. In 1944, he's now 31. I went to Asheville and it got me a job sorting mica. Now remember, this is his first job, and also remember, it's the Second World War, and manpower was scarce. But back to the letter. They said we could do that job better than the sighted people. I just got to work 9 weeks, and our part of the job closed down. I stayed a while longer over there to see if it would start back up, but it never did. I stayed with my sister and her husband. They was as good to me as they could be. That was a good job, but in one way, I didn't like it. My sister and her husband wanted me with them all the time. They would come after me at night and take me to work in the morning. I didn't want that. I wanted out on my own like other people. I wanted to get out and get me a girl just like other people. Well, I come back home and I stayed around here most of the time. My stepmother died in 1951. Now you see he's 38. Grady Weaver started teaching me to read and write Braille in 1951. I can't spell very good, but that helped some. I stayed at home with my father until 1957. You see, his life is passing. He's now 44. My father got so bad sick that they had to put him in a rest home, and I went to Morristown and I got me a job in a sheltered shop. Mattie Ruth was working there at that time. She told somebody, "The Salmons has come. The bass will be here next." Sure enough, in a few days a man did come by the name of Bass. Just a little while after I went to work, Mattie Ruth got sick and went home. She liked to have died. She didn't come back anymore for about 3 years. She worked for a while and her father got sick, and she went home to take care of him. He died in 1962. Now you see he's 49. After that, I went up and I got Mattie Ruth, Her mother said she ought to have run me off the first time I ever come up there. She said I took the last girl she had. I was 43 years old before I got out on my own, but it has been the best part of my life. If I had stayed with my people, I don't guess I would have been living by now. I didn't have nothing to live for. Well, that's the letter. It requires no comment. It tells us what we have to do. In a very real sense, Edgar Salmons speaks for all of us. He speaks for you and he speaks for me. The imprisonment and the lack of opportunity were just as cruel and just as real as if they had been deliberately imposed. They were just as degrading, just as blighting, and just as painful. We must see that it never happens again. That is why we have to strengthen the Federation, why we have to speak out, and why we have to disregard the hostility and the backlash. Our climb up the stairs to freedom has been slow and difficult, but we're nearing the top. We carry with us a trust for Dr. Tenbrook, for Edgar Salmons, and for all of those others who went before us. We also carry a trust for those who will follow, for the blind of the decades ahead. Yesterday and tomorrow meet in this present time, and we are the ones who have the responsibility, and we can't avoid that responsibility. Our final climb up the stairs will not be easy, but we must make it. The stakes are too high and the alternatives too terrible to allow it to be any other way. If we fail to meet the challenge or dishonor our trust, we will fall far down the stairs, and the journey back up will be long and painful, probably as much as another generation. But of course, we won't fail. We'll continue to climb. Our heritage demands it. Our faith confirms it. Our humanity requires it. Whatever the sacrifice, we will make it. Whatever the price, we will pay it. Seen from this perspective, the hostility and the backlash, the challenges and the confrontations are hardly worth noticing. They are only an irritant. My brothers and my sisters, if we only will, the future is ours. Come, join me on the stairs and we'll finish the journey together.